The stars burned cold in the vast silence of space, but the fire in Drake Callahan's chest raged hotter than any sun. He stood at the viewport of the battered refugee ship, his knuckles white against the rusted metal frame. Beyond the reinforced glass, his home, a world that had once thrived with the laughter of children, the hum of cities, the steady pulse of humanity, was nothing more than a drifting mass of ruin. The blue-green jewel of Earth, shattered by alien arrogance, scattered across the void in 1,000 lifeless fragments. He had seen it fall, had felt the tremors as the Xerath Dominion's warships descended upon the skies, their weapons cutting into the planet's flesh, the screams of his people lost beneath the deafening roar of orbital bombardment. He had fought in the chaos, trying to defend a world already condemned. He had watched his comrades die, his family's last transmission, swallowed by static as fire rained from the heavens, and now, all that remained was silence. A silence that pressed into his skull like a vice, thick with the unspoken truth. Humanity was gone. The others in the refugee vessel huddled in the dim confines of the ship's failing systems, their faces, gaunt with hunger, their bodies weighed down by despair. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, survivors, but only just. Their voices had grown quieter in the passing days, their hope bleeding out with each lost transmission, each dying light on their radar. There would be no reinforcements, no grand retaliation. The species that had clawed its way from the dirt to the stars had been reduced to ghosts, scattered remnants fleeing the empire that had deemed them unworthy of existence. Then came the transmission. It crackled through the ship's comms, a voice sharp with the smug satisfaction of a predator, toying with prey. The Xerath had found them. Not to kill, not yet. No, they wanted to savor the moment. The message played across every console, every broken screen, in a language Drake had learned through bloodshed and necessity. Your kind is finished. Your world burns, and soon so will the last of you. Run if you like, hide if you can, but know this, you are never more than embers waiting to die out. Embers. Something inside him twisted at the word, a deep, old thing born from the bones of humanity's long, unyielding history. Embers did not die. Embers waited, smoldered, and given the right spark, they raged. A slow breath filled his lungs, the air acrid with the staleness of a ship running on borrowed time. He turned to the others, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of the consoles, their eyes hollow, lost. They had given up. He could see it in their trembling hands, the way they shrank from the fight before it had even begun. Drake did not blame them. But he was not like them. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stillness. We are not finished. Some looked up. Most didn't. He moved through the cabin, past the broken, the weary, the ones who had seen too much. He did not waste words on empty promises he had none to give. He spoke only truth, sharp and unwavering. The Xerath think they've won, that will scatter like ash in the wind, that will fade, unnoticed, forgotten. He reached the central console, its flickering data streams reflecting in his cold gaze. His fingers hovered over the interface, pulling up what little remained of their maps, their resources, scattered outposts, derelict stations, fragments of what once was. But I will not let them forget us. His eyes locked onto the shape of a world marked in red, a former human research facility abandoned before the war. It was not much, but it was enough. I don't need an army. His voice dropped to a whisper, a promise made to no one and to everyone. I just need fire. No one stopped him as he keyed in the coordinates. For Earth, for humanity, for everything they had stolen from him, Drake Callahan would burn the stars. The silence aboard the refugee ship grew oppressive. The walls seemed to close in as Drake sat alone in the dim glow of a malfunctioning console. The faint hum of the ship's dying engines was the only sound that accompanied his thoughts. But it was no comfort. He had never been the kind of man to wait. Patience had never been his virtue. Earth was gone, and there was only one thing left to do. Strike back. As the minutes dragged on, The harsh reality of his mission began to settle into his bones. No one else aboard the ship believed in this. No one else had the fire that burned within him. But they had also seen too much, too many losses, too many defeats. The idea of revenge, of fighting back, was a distant memory to them. But not to Drake, not to him. The transmission had shaken him to his core, but it had also ignited something else, something primal. The Xerath thought humanity would simply disappear, fade into the darkness of space, powerless and meek. They were wrong. He would prove it. He had no grand plan, no army, no resources. What he had were rage, a spark of vengeance, and an undying need to see them burn. And he had the tool to make that happen. The Inferno Protocol. It was a remnant of human ingenuity, a weapon designed in the event of a catastrophic war. A weapon so destructive, so merciless that even the most hardened military officials had deemed it too cruel to deploy. It was never meant to see the light of day, until now. The research station had been abandoned, its records mostly erased in the wake of the war, but Drake had found it. A forgotten corner of space where humanity's last desperate efforts had been hidden. It was there he had discovered the Inferno Protocol, hidden within the databanks of a derelict facility. He had analyzed it, modified it, and adapted it to his needs. Now, it would be the flame that would burn the Xerath Empire to the ground. Drake had always believed in the strength of humanity. He had fought alongside countless men and women who, despite their flaws, had risen to the challenge of every impossible situation. He knew the Xerath would underestimate them, just as they had underestimated him. That was their mistake. And he would make them pay for it. The coordinates were locked in, the weapons system was primed, and the ship's engines were prepared for a jump. He was ready to leave behind the broken remnants of Earth, to venture into the heart of Xerath space. The next target would be a small mining colony, far from the Empire's core but crucial to their resources. It would be a small victory, a blow to their pride, and for Drake, it would be the first step in a campaign of vengeance that would spread across the galaxy. He stood staring at the fading star map on the console. His eyes traced the path ahead, the stars stretching out into infinity. It was all too easy to feel insignificant, to feel as though one man, one soul, could do nothing against the tide of an entire empire. But that was not the way he saw it. In the face of overwhelming odds, humanity had always found a way to fight. It had always found a way to survive. The crew, those who had yet to give up, gathered in the main chamber as the ship's engine roared to life. They were silent, their faces weary and uncertain. They had no faith in him and his mission. But Drake knew the truth. There was no turning back now. If they were going to survive, it would be because of him. It would be because he had the fire to fight, the will to destroy. The jump sequence initiated, and the ship surged forward into the unknown. The stars stretched and warped, and in the span of seconds, they were gone. The mining colony appeared on the sensors, a small, unremarkable, world orbiting a gas giant. Its inhabitants had long been under the control of the Xerath, forced to extract precious resources for the Empire's insatiable hunger. But today, it would be a symbol of defiance. It would be a world that burned. Drake's fingers danced across the control panel, activating the Inferno Protocol. The nanoweapon activated, its virus-like tendrils spreading across the planet's atmosphere, igniting the very air itself. He didn't need to wait for confirmation. He didn't need to see the flames rise in the distance. He knew the Xerath would feel the heat of their own arrogance. The comms crackled to life as Drake transmitted his message across the planet, knowing it would reach their rulers. You burn my world, now I burn yours. It was a simple message, but it was enough. The surface of the mining colony erupted into flames. The ground cracked open, molten rivers of fire coursing through the streets. The air itself became a cauldron of infernal heat, the planet's surface scorched beyond recognition. Drake watched, his expression unreadable, as the destruction unfolded. There was no joy in it, no triumph. Only a cold sense of purpose, a relentless drive to see the Xerath pay for what they had done. As the colony burned, Drake didn't feel the satisfaction he had imagined. There was no celebration, no victory dance. The Inferno protocol had done its job. The Xerath would never underestimate humanity again. But in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered whether this fire would be enough. Would it truly burn away the shame of Earth's destruction? Or would it be another ember in a much larger inferno? He didn't have time to contemplate. The war had only just begun, and the Xerath would learn what humanity was capable of. Drake's first strike had been swift, efficient, and devastating, but the Xerath, like all empires, were not easily toppled. As the flames of the mining colony burned out, news of the attack spread faster than he could imagine, and it did not take long for the vast war machine of the Xerath Dominion to take notice of the destruction. In the beginning, they had brushed it off as the actions of a lone, desperate survivor. But now, after the burning of a second mining world, they knew that something far more dangerous had emerged from the ashes of humanity. Drake didn't wait for them to come to him. He didn't need to. He was always one step ahead. His plan was simple but effective: strike the fringe worlds, disrupt their supply lines, and cause them to waste precious resources chasing him across the galaxy. The Xerath would learn the same lesson that humanity had learned countless times before. They could not be everywhere, not all at once. They were an empire of arrogance, and arrogance could be shattered by a few determined souls. But there was one problem Drake had not anticipated. The Xerath were more cunning than he had given them credit for. They were quick to adapt, ruthless in their pursuit, and unafraid to burn entire star systems to stop him. It wasn't long before they began to send their best forces after him, each mission more desperate and brutal than the last. The first of these forces was led by a ruthless Xerath warlord named Vael'Zorath. He was everything Drake had expected, a hulking figure of muscle and alien might, his face permanently etched with the scars of countless battles. He was a veteran of the Xerath military, a legend among his people, and now he had been dispatched to hunt down the human that had dared to strike at their empire. Drake had known that the day would come when the Xerath would send their best, but he hadn't been prepared for how quickly they would find him. He had barely finished attacking his third target, a communications hub that had been key to the Xerath's control of the galaxy's outer rim, when Vael'Zorath's fleet arrived. A fleet so massive it could have swallowed a dozen refugee ships whole. It appeared without warning, decimating everything in its path. The battle was fierce, and the odds were against Drake. The refugee ship, now his base of operations, was no match for the Xerath fleet. They had superior numbers, superior firepower, and most of all, the advantage of experience. But Drake had something they didn't: resolve. It wasn't about surviving. It wasn't even about winning. It was about sending a message. He would make them chase him across the stars if he had to. As the enemy fleet closed in, Drake took to the fighter bay. He wasn't a pilot by training, but he didn't need to be. The ship's modified fighters were quick, agile, and deadly in the right hands like his. He boarded one, launched into space, and engaged in the dogfight of his life. The skies became a blur of bright flashes, the whine of weapons fire filling the silence of space. His mind was focused, every instinct screaming at him to survive. But he didn't just want to survive. He wanted to hurt the Xerath. A strike here. A quick bomb dropped there. A burst of plasma in the side of a battleship. Drake's small victories were never enough to tip the scales, but they were enough to keep the Xerath on edge. He didn't need to win every fight. He just needed to make it painful. He needed to show them that even the smallest spark of humanity was enough to bring the fire. But Vael'Zorath was not so easily shaken. With each blow Drake struck, the warlord only grew more determined. He knew that this human was not like the others. This human was unstoppable. He had seen too many worlds burn in the wake of Drake's attacks. And so, Vael'Zorath escalated the conflict. On the fringes of the galaxy, in a quiet corner far from the battlefields of Earth, Vael'Zorath, unleashed a new kind of terror. The Xerath hunter drones, an army of advanced killing machines designed for one purpose: the eradication of targets. These drones were programmed with a single directive: track and eliminate Drake Callahan, and they would stop at nothing to do so. Drake's world, which had once seemed vast and filled with endless possibilities, suddenly felt small. Every shadow in the corners of his ship seemed to hide an enemy. Every quiet moment a prelude to an ambush. The drones were everywhere, and they were relentless. At first, he thought they were nothing more than a new weapon in the Xerath's arsenal, something to be outmaneuvered. But soon it became clear that they were more than that. They were a message that no matter how hard he fought, the Xerath would always be one step ahead. They would never let him escape. It was then that Drake began to question himself. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he could win. He had always believed that humanity's resilience would be enough, that no matter the odds, they could rise from the ashes. But as the drones closed in, the walls around him tightened. The refugees aboard the ship began to question whether their fight was worth it, whether they were just prolonging their inevitable extinction. Drake knew that in their eyes he had become a symbol of hope, yes, but also of hopelessness. His war, which had started as a crusade for justice, was now a campaign of survival. And worse, there was something darker within him. He could feel it growing, festering beneath the surface. The rage, the fire that had driven him forward, was beginning to consume him. He could taste the bitterness of his need for vengeance, and he knew that it was a hunger that would never be sated. It wasn't about saving humanity anymore. It wasn't even about winning. It was about watching the Xerath burn. But how far would he go to make them feel that same pain? As the drones closed in and the remnants of the refugee ship were pulled into the grip of the Xerath military, Drake made his decision. He would burn them all. The Xerath Empire had been rattled by Drake's small victories, but it was clear that they were not going to back down. The hunter drones, relentless and unforgiving, had narrowed the net around him, driving the last remnants of humanity to the edge of extinction. Drake was no fool. He knew that it wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about sending a message, proving that the fire of humanity couldn't be extinguished no matter the cost. The refugee ship, now little more than a drifting relic, had barely evaded destruction for the past few days, thanks to Drake's evasive maneuvers and quick thinking. But there was no denying the inevitable. The Xerath were closing in, and this time they weren't sending drones, they were sending the entire might of their fleet. Drake knew it was coming. He had expected as much. He had been running for far too long, fighting battles too small to matter in the grand scheme of the war. The Xerath would never let a human, one human, destroy their empire. His actions had already cost them far more than they had expected. Now they would make him pay. Drake watched from the command deck as the massive fleet of Xerath warships emerged from the darkness of space, their colossal forms stretching across the stars. Their weapons glowed ominously, ready to unleash hell upon the refugee ship. It was a trap from which there was no escape. But Drake didn't feel fear. No, what he felt was resolve. He turned to face the small crew that still remained aboard. They were scared, hell, they had every right to be. But in their eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in so long, a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "We're going to make this count," he said. There was no time for speeches, no time for promises. He didn't need to inspire them, he needed them to follow him. His plan was simple. He would take the fight, directly to the heart of the Xerath Empire, their capital, Xerath Prime. It was the one place they would never expect him to strike. The moment they believed he was cornered, when they were certain he would try to run, he would show them that humanity wasn't just some cornered animal to be eradicated. No, they were the spark that could ignite the galaxy. Drake set the course, and as the ship's engines roared to life, he knew that there was no turning back now. The enemy was too close, and their guns were too powerful. They had him, and that was exactly what he wanted. As the ship approached the outskirts of Xerath Prime's defense grid, the magnitude of the plan began to settle in. Drake's mind raced, calculating every move. He had spent months preparing for this moment, studying the enemy's weaknesses, learning their patterns. But this wasn't just about strategy. It was about making them feel the pain of what they had done. To show them that even if humanity was gone, the fire of their vengeance would never be quenched. But as the ship closed in on the capital, Drake encountered a problem he hadn't foreseen. Vael'Zorath. The warlord was not just a general. He was a monster in his own right, the epitome of the Xerath military, ruthless, unyielding, and far too prepared for Drake's recklessness. He had been waiting for him, and now he had him cornered. A single shot from Vael'Zorath's flagship sent Drake's ship spiraling out of control, the lights flickering, the hull groaning under the stress. The refugee ship was already beginning to fracture, but it didn't matter. This was where it would end. This was where the fire would finally spread. Drake leapt from his seat and made his way to the fighter bay. He had no intention of going down without a fight. The Xerath would have to do more than just destroy the ship. They would have to destroy him. As he boarded the fighter, the comms crackled to life, and Vael'Zorath's voice boomed in his ears. "You've come all this way, human, only to die at my hand. Do you really think you can stand against the might of the Xerath?" Drake's lips curled into a bitter smile as he engaged the fighter's engines. "I'm not here to stand, Vael'Zorath. I'm here to burn." The battle that followed was a chaotic, all-consuming storm. Drake weaved between incoming fire, dodging blasts from the Xerath warships as he targeted their weak points. His heart pounded in his chest, each second a step closer to the inevitable confrontation. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for every life that had been lost, every life that had been erased by the Xerath. And then he saw it. The heart of the Xerath Empire, Xerath Prime, loomed ahead, its sprawling cities a sickly glow against the dark void. The cityscape was breathtaking in its beauty, but Drake only saw one thing: the pain, the destruction, the rage that burned inside him. He triggered the Inferno protocol. The key weapon had been his secret all along, a ticking time bomb that had been simmering in the back of his mind. As the nanoweapon activated, Drake's ship shuddered with the force of the blast. The skies over Xerath Prime ignited, fire and ash raining down on the city. It was not just an attack, it was the culmination of everything humanity had lost. The entire surface of the planet began to burn. Fires consumed the atmosphere, turning the world into a cauldron of heat. The Xerath were helpless against it. Their ships tried to flee, their defenses useless against the unstoppable force of the Inferno protocol. And yet, as the flames rose, something inside Drake twisted. He had done it. He had struck at the heart of the Empire. But was this really what he had wanted? Was this the justice he had fought for, or had he become the monster he had sworn to destroy? In that moment, standing on the precipice of victory, Drake realized something crucial. The fire had always been inside him, not just as a weapon, but as a part of who he was. The last of the Xerath fleet burned in the distance, and Drake turned, away from the destruction, the weight of what he had done pressing on him. The galaxy had been changed irrevocably, but the war was far from over. The Inferno on Xerath Prime was far from over. It had consumed the planet, reducing its cities to molten ruins, its oceans to vapor. It was a perfect execution of vengeance, an act that would resonate through the galaxy for centuries. But as Drake sat in the cockpit of his fighter, looking at the burning world below, he didn't feel the satisfaction he had anticipated. He didn't feel triumph. He felt emptiness. The fire had spread far and wide, burning across the capital and the military strongholds. The Xerath Empire, once the most powerful in the galaxy, had been dealt a blow so severe it would take centuries for them to recover. But in the wake of his success, Drake had come to understand something crucial. Vengeance didn't heal the wounds, it only left more scars. As his fighter touched down on a makeshift landing pad aboard a damaged refugee ship, Drake's eyes fell to the flickering screens that displayed the devastation across the galaxy. The damage had been done, but there was no going back. The remaining survivors of humanity, the ones who had trusted him to lead them through the chaos, now looked to him with a mixture of awe and fear. They had followed him across the stars, watching as he burned the enemies of their species one by one. But now they saw the cost of fire, of rage. Drake disembarked, stepping out onto the ship's deck, his boots heavy against the cold metal. His face was streaked with the remnants of the battle, and his eyes held the weight of every life lost. Every soul that had been burned in the flames he had set in motion. He had won. The Xerath Empire had been crippled, but humanity was still shattered. The refugees aboard the ship, the remnants of what was once a thriving species, had nowhere to go. The galaxy was a cold, unforgiving place, and now they were the hunted, not just by the Xerath, but by every species that saw them as a threat, a remnant of a species too dangerous to exist. Captain Ilara Vasquez, once an outspoken opponent of Drake's methods, approached him. Her face was lined with exhaustion, her eyes heavy with the burden of leadership. She had fought alongside him, had believed in his cause, but now even she couldn't deny the price of what they had accomplished. "Is it worth it, Drake?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost too quiet for him to hear over the hum of the engines. "What we've become, what we've lost. Can you even look at yourself and say it was worth it?" Drake's eyes lingered on her face, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had seen the destruction, had felt the pain of every death, and yet a part of him couldn't escape the hollow satisfaction that he had finally struck a blow against the empire that had destroyed Earth. But at what cost? "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can ever know, but I do know one thing. We survive. And we keep fighting. We have no choice." Ilara's gaze softened, but there was no smile, no reassurance in her eyes. Only the cold reality of their situation. "We'll survive. But we can't keep fighting like this. Not forever." And there it was. The truth that had haunted him for so long. The truth that vengeance had been a temporary salve for wounds too deep to heal. The war was not over. The Xerath had been weakened, but there were still other empires, other threats on the horizon. The galaxy would continue to spin, and humanity would continue to fight, but it would never be the same. The ship's comms crackled, and a voice interrupted their quiet moment. "Captain Vasquez, we've received word from a nearby system. There's a fleet gathering, an allied force of human resistance fighters. They've been tracking us for weeks. They want to join our cause." Ilara turned to the comms officer, her expression unreadable. Drake didn't move, didn't even flinch. The battle was shifting once more. The war was far from over. The refugee ship began to drift toward the system, the crew preparing for the next stage in their journey. A new alliance, a new beginning. But as Drake stood there watching the stars stretch out before him, he couldn't help but wonder if they would ever truly be free of the ghosts of the past. Drake had always believed that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt, to endure, to rise from the ashes of its own destruction. But now, as he watched the remnants of the human race begin to rebuild, he couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had been lost. The fire that had driven him forward, the rage that had fueled every decision, had burned too brightly, too intensely. There was nothing left but ash. He had destroyed an empire. He had avenged Earth. But the question that lingered in the back of his mind was the one that would never be answered. What happens when the fire that fuels you consumes everything else? The galaxy had begun to heal, but it was a slow, painful process. The fires of vengeance that Drake Callahan had set across the stars were finally starting to die down, leaving behind nothing but smoldering ruins and broken empires. The Xerath were broken, their capital reduced to ashes, their fleet scattered. But in the wake of their collapse, something else had taken root, the possibility of something new. Drake stood alone on the observation deck of the refugee ship, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The remnants of humanity had found a new hope in the chaos. The survivors had come together, the last of Earth's children uniting under a common banner. They were no longer the weak, scattered remnants they once were. They were the architects of their own future. But at what cost? The weight of the past was a constant presence in Drake's mind. He had been the one to strike the first blow, to send the flames of rebellion into the heart of the Xerath Empire. But now, as he looked at the fleet of ships gathered around him, he couldn't shake the nagging question that had haunted him since the destruction of Xerath Prime. What did he become in the process? He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He was something else entirely, something that neither the survivors nor the Xerath could ever have imagined. He had become the spark that could ignite an entire galaxy. But sparks, no matter how bright,
eventually fade, Drake. A voice broke through his thoughts.
It was Alara Vasquez stepping up beside him. She was no longer the captain of the refugee fleet, not officially, but in truth, she was the one who held the fragile threads of humanity's future together. "We've received a transmission," she said, her voice calm, but there was something unspoken in her words. Drake turned to her, his face expressionless, but a flicker of curiosity sparked in his chest. Alara handed him a datapad, and his eyes scanned the message. It was from an uncharted sector far beyond the reach of the human colonies. It was a transmission from a race Drake had never heard of before, a species so ancient, so advanced, that their very existence was a mystery. They had been watching humanity from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And now, that moment had come. "We are the Vecra, travelers of the stars. We have seen your struggle. We have seen your rage, and we offer you a choice. Join us and become part of something greater than yourself. The galaxy is vast, and there are many wars yet to be fought. Will you remain the fire that burns everything, or will you become the flame that guides the way?" The message ended abruptly, leaving more questions than answers. But as Drake stared at the screen, a feeling began to stir within him, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Do you think they can be trusted?" Alara asked, her voice uncertain. Drake didn't answer immediately. The past had taught him that trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered by betrayal. But there was something in the message that struck him, a sense of purpose, something that humanity had lost long ago. He looked out at the stars, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had come before. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but we don't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore. If we're going to survive, we need to find a way to move forward. And maybe this is the way." As the fleet set course toward the unknown, the light of distant stars twinkled. In the distance, a symbol of new beginnings and untold possibilities. But as Drake watched the darkness of space ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fire he had started was far from finished. The galaxy was vast, and humanity, it seemed, was far from being done with its journey.